88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Weekends. My name is Nathan, the host of What to Watch Weekends, and I'm not the only one in the station today. I have a guest with me today, if he'd like to introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Noah, and I run the Aloha Fridays show on Fridays from 2 to 3 p.m.
Nice. Aren't you also part of News Central?
For the rest of the year, yeah.
All right. Well, very nice. So, Noah, I do believe that for tonight's show, we're going to be talking about something very specific, something that means a lot to both of us, that being giant Japanese monster movies.
Round of applause.
Round of applause for giant Japanese monster movies. One of the things that Noah and I think we bonded over initially was the fact that we both really like Godzilla when we first met. And I figured it'd be kind of cool to have you on as a guest for something very similar to Godzilla in a supposed theme and overall style. And that would be the Gamera series of movies, which is sort of a closely associated storyline, or not storyline, closely associated franchise with Godzilla. And the fact that it's also giant Japanese monsters and it's kind of a reptilian creature that destroys Japan. But this one is more cheesy and a bit nicer than Godzilla on most instances. And his movies have a higher sort of a different bell curve. Because with Godzilla, it can kind of get very middle of the road to very bad to quite good. Gamera, I think, goes from great to middle of the road to sometimes abysmal. It's a very different swinging quality with very fewer movies. So with all that being said, I suppose the best place to start with that sort of curve would be the first one. And no better place to begin than at the beginning. Excuse me. Wow. You'd think after drinking water, my throat would be more clear, but apparently not. Anyways, so to get things rolling along, we should start with Gamera the Giant Monster from 1965, available to watch on Amazon and Tubi. I should mention that for the rest of the episode, whenever we get to one of these movies that was broadcast in America, we're going to mention the separate title for the movie. And for this one, it is Gamera the Invincible when it reached the States, which is kind of a goofy name, but it fits the giant monster idea at the very least. And he certainly is kind of invincible with his giant turtle shell. So whatever. So basic plot line of the original Gamera movie is it's about a nuke that brings a giant turtle to life in the Arctic. Pretty standard stuff. I suppose let's start with you, Noah. I want to ask, you've seen the first movie before.
Yeah.
What's your opinion of it?
I mean, I feel like it's interesting how, with all these big monster movies, you know, Gamera, Godzilla, King Kong, even, King Kong's American. But when you watch them, the first movie, it's always the black and white, very high stakes, very intense movie.
Right.
And then the very next one is actual slop.
Yeah.
And then it sort of mediates between, sometimes you have really good and, insightful and creative reinterpretations of the character. And then other times they're actually flying, or they're fighting giant robots and aliens and mind control. And well, that doesn't mean it can't be fun. I mean, some of those like Showa Godzilla movies are unironically some of my favorite of the series.
Right.
I mean, you can't top the scene in Godzilla versus the Smog Monster when he starts flying, or when in Godzilla versus Gigan they start talking, speaking English, in fact, with little Japanese speech bubbles in the dub. But it's interesting how these beginnings, it's got a very clear cut message, and then in later adaptations that can get either diluted or reworked into a more modern, serious adaptation.
Right. Yeah. And I want to pinpoint two things you've just said that I think are really insightful and really good transitions to two big points about the first Gamera movie. One of them is the overall message of the movie, which is that it's about a nuclear radiation bringing a turtle back to life in the Arctic. It's a commentary on nuclear war. I will mention, though, that it came out in 1965, and that doesn't mean that it loses relevance. But put quite frankly, I find that the message of Gamera is a little more diluted compared to the message of the original Godzilla, speaking from the perspective that it is the same exact message as the original Godzilla, just with a turtle instead of a giant lizard.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think I get where you're going because, I mean, granted, 1965, that's the peak of the Cold War.
Right.
The Cuban Missile Crisis is probably still fresh on people's minds.
Sure.
Like how the COVID pandemic is still fresh on our minds. And it's been 5 years since that happened.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think that kind of makes sense, but the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Cold War as a whole, it doesn't ring the same as the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
No, absolutely not.
It doesn't have the same cultural impact and the real feel to it.
The Cold War, sorry to cut you off, but I just want to like spell it out in a way that makes sense to me. Sorry to cut you off.
No, you're good. Go for it.
The Cold War is the fear of a nuke going off and being launched. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that inspired Godzilla, is a nuke actually going off. It's the like full proof that this can happen. And the Cold War is kind of the response and the fear surrounding, whoa, what if this is going to happen again in the future? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think, is that where you were going with that? Again, I hate to cut you off, but...
Oh, it's all right. Let me just see.
What you doing some history research over there?
Well, I'm just looking into... let's see. When did that happen?
Ooh.
Yeah. So at that point, because Gamera the Giant Monster was released November 27th, 1965, American involvement in Vietnam had already started.
Right.
So, I mean, again, but that's Southeast Asia. That's nowhere near Japan. But again, it's still kind of contributing to the Cold War escalation and the domino theory. But again, that's more a U.S.-Soviet Union thing. With the original Godzilla, I feel like its message of anti-nuclear proliferation is incredibly strong because it was not even a decade after the only time nuclear weapons have ever been used in war.
Yeah. And
the people that made that movie were there to see it.
Yeah.
And I think that, of course, nuclear non-proliferation is incredibly important, especially in our modern day and time. And in those days, and if you look at the charts of how many nuclear weapons were in the world, the amount of weapons that exist in the world right now were the amount that the U.S. alone had back in those days.
Oh dear.
Yeah, there were roughly 3 times more nuclear weapons back in the 60s and 70s than there are in the existence across the entire world right now.
I feel like we should, this is such a valid conversation, but I think we should definitely cut off the nuclear commentary there because I think we've gotten the point across that it's a bit diluted, and I don't want to think about the implications of nuclear war tonight.
Just be happy that the people who were there in the time managed to navigate us to now.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to, all of that is very interesting, and I think we've proven our point pretty extensively. Thank you for all that commentary, Noah. I do appreciate it, even though it's now making me very scared. So, we'll talk about something that's not that scary. We'll kind of backtrack to when you were talking about the Godzilla movies and how at some point Godzilla starts flying. And we'll mention the fact that part of the reason the message is a bit diluted in the original Gamera movie is the fact that at some point he tucks his little head, his arms and legs into his shell, and then there's fire that starts shooting out of it, and he spins around and starts flying. And it's certainly not the most serious part of the movie, but it certainly is the funniest and most mind-blowing thing I saw as a kaiju fan who had seen a lot of Godzilla movies. Let me tell you, my mom, brother, father and I all watching in disbelief as he just started to fly was an unforgettable experience. So the original Gamera, I'd still recommend on that basis alone. If you're looking for an unforgettable experience as a kaiju fan or as just an overall movie watcher, you can't get a lot better than the original Gamera when it comes to the series itself. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think it delivers that B-movie thrill in just the right amount of ways. With all that being said, we're going to have to really bring up the pace. Once again, I appreciate all the talk on nuclear stuff, but we really got to bring up the pace.
No, nuclear bombs really do not come back in the series.
Right. Yeah, no, definitely not. So thankfully, we can avoid talking about the existential dread caused with that and move on nicely to Gamera versus Barugon from 1966, available to watch on Amazon with a subscription and Tubi with ads. I should mention that the alternate title to this when it was aired on TV in the US was War of the Monsters, which works pretty well because it's a fight between two monsters. Anyways, basic plot, we have these thieves who go to an island and steal an opal, this sort of gemstone that releases a giant salamander named Barugon. Let me ask, have you seen this movie, Noah?
I feel like I haven't, but again, I think I have in a sense. I'm just looking at the poster right here. This very much so reads to me Godzilla Raids Again.
Yes, kind of a thing. The one where he fights Anguirus for the first time, which is, we can't get into the whole history of the Godzilla thing, but it's essentially the sequel to the original Gamera movie where they introduce another monster for him to fight for the first time. And kind of objectively speaking, in comparison to the first movie, it dips in quality just a little bit. Although I will say, even in context of watching the dub version, I think Gamera vs. Barugon is a better sequel than Godzilla Raids Again because they didn't rename the character to Gigantus and use the same roar as the opposing monster during all of the fight scenes. They actually gave Barugon like his own roar. They kept his name as Gamera. They kept it more consistent, and they had an actual fight sequence that lasted more than 2 fights rather than Anguirus just being thrown into the ocean. With this one, it's more of there's actual fight sequences, and the creature that Gamera's fighting has some actual powers. One of them being the fact that it can stick its tongue out and spray this freezing gas and freeze Gamera in place. Oh. Insanely crazy stuff. I will also say he can shoot rainbows out of his back.
Yeah, no, there's a bit of we went from, the turtle can fly to he's shooting rainbows out of his back. The monster's shooting rainbows out of his back and sticking his tongue out. That's crazy.
Yes, it is. I mean,
that's insane.
I will give it props. That's certainly unique for a kaiju movie. Definitely haven't seen that before. And the idea of having like deadly rainbows certainly adds a sort of physics department to the whole giant monster thing. You got to figure out how do you arc it properly to hit your enemy. So it's got that.
Do not let Alex Jones watch this movie. Barugon is turning the...
Oh dear.
But the similarities to Godzilla Raids Again are kind of prevalent. I mean, it's a hyper successful big monster movie, and then immediately the president and the company's like, make another one, and they kind of just push it out like, oh, go, 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 and the main character fights a big spiky monster. Coincidence? I think not.
I'll give you that, honestly. Nice what you did there. Coincidence. But I definitely does show signs of being just a bit rushed. I will give you that. It does reek a little bit of being somewhat rushed in that department. It reeks of being a pushed out sequel that wasn't really planned for. But again, in comparison to Raids Again, that was clearly slapped together with duct tape, this one I feel like was glued together rather than slapped with duct tape. You know, I think they had like some more, so they at least
there was a little bit more that was put into it than 9 months of, oh, we're just making a movie, whatever, just go for it.
Yeah, I think they put in a little more thought. And I think it kind of resulted in that fight being reused in a lot of the Gamera movies, mostly because they were running low on a budget. But at the same time, it's not like I complain about ever rewatching those fight sequences, because they hold up okay. So it's got that going for it. Let me think here. What's our time looking like? Because we might...
It's 8:36.
It is 8:36. We've started a bit late. Let's see here. Since we've talked about the first two, I think we can go to break and probably speed run through the next, let's say, possibly 4 of them once we get back from break.
I mean, yeah, they're pretty much the same movie, except I almost said Gigan. Gamera, wrong franchise. Gamera kind of pulls out a new stunt each time.
Yeah, and we'll get to those when we get to those. But might as well take a quick moment and go to break really quickly. So we'll be back soon to continue talking about Gamera. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Weekends. My name is Nathan.
I'm Noah.
You are Noah.
Let's get going.
Let's get going. We are going to be jumping back into the Gamera series. So we left off on the second one. Let's jump into the third one. That being Gamera vs. Gyaos from 1967, available on Amazon Prime with a subscription and Tubi free with ads. This one is known as, in America when it was broadcast to TV, Return of the Giant Monsters, which makes only half as much sense because, sure, Gamera is returning, but Gyaos is completely new. So, okay, where are we going with this? Anyways, so Gyaos, a massive bat, makes its first appearance after a bunch of volcano explosions, and Gamera has to fight it. Okay, let's talk about this movie. Have you seen this one, Noah?
I think I have.
I'm guessing it's probably been a while for you.
It might have been like during COVID, where it's just sit down and like, haha, look at those silly monsters.
Right. I will say, if you're able to look up a picture here, let me bring up my most important point.
Cannot turn its head due to having 2 spines and produces a supersonic ray using a forked tongue.
Yes. Now,
it looks like Rodan on crack.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for bringing up that really important point. It absolutely does. Does that look like a bat to you?
No, he looks like a demented pterosaur, like the Dimorphodons from Jurassic World.
You're gonna have to narrow it down because I've only ever seen the first Jurassic World movie.
Let's see.
I'll take your word for it, but I do want to see an image of this. But yes, Gyaos does not look like a bat. He looks like a pteranodon in a way, which was funny because they had a pteranodon in the Godzilla series, that being Rodan. So Gamera really hasn't beaten that pattern of copying Godzilla quite yet. The only difference is that he was able to fly a lot sooner than Godzilla. But even then, you never know. He still shoots fire.
I mean, it's like, put some horns on him.
Yeah.
And that's just Gyaos.
Yeah. That's absolutely what it is. For our listeners at home, what's the name of that dinosaur so they can...
That's a Dimorphodon, specifically the one from Jurassic World.
Yeah. Just put some horns on it, and it's just a flying dinosaur with horns on it, which I find ridiculous. But it's mostly just my own opinion. But, I mean, is it your opinion now, too, that he doesn't look like a bat?
No, I don't think he ever did. I mean, the more recent interpretations, like from the more modern movies, even in like the 2006 one, which we'll get into here in just a bit, they start to add more bat-like features. I can see it kind of with the little ears.
Right.
But they don't look like bat ears. They look like horns.
Right, yeah. And I think that's a good point. I will say, I think the sonic beam attack is really cool. If he looked more like a bat, that would fit really nicely. And I also find it interesting that Gyaos is technically considered Gamera's arch nemesis. Again, we're gonna make so many we've made so many comparisons to Godzilla, and I don't want to. But at the same time, what other big giant monster franchise out there from Japan can we make as a suitable comparison to Gamera? Really? So might as well just go with it every time. I'm going to stop whining that I have to make comparisons to Godzilla. Oh no, my favorite childhood franchise I have to keep talking about. Oh, my heart. I'll put it this way. King Ghidorah is a better arch nemesis than Gyaos. That's my opinion, but I think he's just better. He's more creative. He's more interesting. And more importantly, he kind of earned his spot over time as the arch nemesis. Gyaos is just there as one creature, and then he just kind of becomes the arch nemesis because in the later movies he's able to multiply himself. So there's that. With all that being said, let's see here. Yeah, that's just about it. That's just about it for Gamera versus Gyaos. Still isn't reaching the levels of it dipping down on quality. Unfortunately, we don't have very long to go for that because the next movie we're talking about is Gamera versus Virus. Virus?
Virus. I don't even know what the hootenanny is. I did not see this one.
Oh, you have not. Here.
What is this?
Before we get into that, this movie is from 1968, available to watch on Amazon Prime and Tubi. Amazon with a subscription, Tubi with ads. And this was called Destroy All Planets. Basic plot is it's about two Boy Scouts that get kidnapped by aliens, and the aliens have a big squid named Virus. Let me spell this out. It is not spelled virus as in coronavirus. It is spelled virus as in V-I-R-A-S, and I don't know if that's virus or virus.
I don't even know. Virus?
We'll just say virus. So you've asked, what is this?
Gamera, the friend of the children. I remember that much.
Oh, yes.
He's the friend of the children.
Yeah, that's what makes him not that scary. And again, what kind of neutralized the first movie is the fact that he's just like, oh, there's a random kid about to fall off of a lighthouse, and he goes, let's save the kid, even though I'm in the middle of destroying Japan. And then this one, he's like, I'm going to save these two Boy Scouts from being kidnapped by aliens. They got a big squid. I'm going to fight the squid.
It looks like handsome Squidward. No, he's got the same nose and eyes and whatnot. That's disturbing.
That's a disservice to handsome Squidward, if I'm being honest.
Oh, yeah, no.
Because handsome Squidward doesn't have a beak.
No, that's what it is. It's got a nose.
Is
it a beak?
Yeah,
I can't even tell. It's so fuzzy.
Well, I mean,
that's a beak.
Yeah, that is a beak.
Weird. He looks like I don't know.
It's just not that good. It's a squid. Oh. It's a squid. How very creative.
Oh.
Man, I've never heard of that before.
You know, one thing I will say is that these movies have been made literally back to back year after year.
So far, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even with Godzilla, right? When they did 1954, 1955, and then they took until 1962 to release the next one.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was Godzilla versus King Kong. I think it's interesting how you kind of notice, even with more movies, because it's in such a short amount of time that they made them, it's just, you see how quickly it starts to fall off in a way.
Right. Interesting.
I don't know.
What?
I don't know. What do you think?
Are you saying, like, with the Godzilla franchise, it takes a little longer to notice how quickly they fall off?
I think it's that because the Gamera movies were made in such rapid succession that it was kind of that's the idea, let's just go for it.
Yeah.
Because we need to make the next Gamera movie. Not so much, I have an interesting idea. What if we make this one about... And that's the problem that Godzilla starts running into.
Right.
But we've hit that roadblock, and it's the fourth movie rather than the 10th or 11th.
Yeah, I'll say this. The reason that happened is because the company that was in charge of Gamera, Daiei, was running into financial trouble. And it really shows with Gamera versus Virus. That's a really good point to bring up, because Gamera vs. Virus is the first one that uses footage from the other movies in a flashback. And they're like, here's him fighting Barugon, and here's him fighting Gyaos again. Here we go. I absolutely agree with you. And I think that point is very valid. And that's my response to it is this is around the time where Daiei started to run into their financial troubles and really started to have to go, okay, we have to push this out because otherwise how are we going to make money back? So they looked for cost-cutting techniques, and it really does start to show. I feel was that a good enough response to your question there?
Yeah, I think so. Because, I mean, I'm looking at the timeline of these movies, and it's so interesting to see how right about when things are going to shift, it's just a big compression, like movie after movie after movie after movie.
Yeah.
And then, you know, that's what starts happening right before the switch between eras of Godzilla. But
Right.
to start off the Gamera series like that, I mean, I am not surprised that that's happening, because when the Gamera movies were coming out, that's when that period of Godzilla's history was starting. So I feel like because it was already sort of an emulation of Godzilla, they were falling into the same pitfalls at the same time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it definitely was correlating in some capacity. And that's a really good observation with it. I think it goes to show that, how do I put it? It's weird to think about because these are B movies at the end of the day. They clearly aren't big studio productions. They're made for low budgets, relatively speaking, to what else was coming out around the time. And having a lower budget when you've got big suits leads to cutting as many corners as you possibly can. And I suppose that's shown no better than in the next movie that is in the Gamera series, that being Gamera vs. Guiron from 1969, available to watch on Amazon Prime and Tubi. This one, when it came out in the United States, was called Attack of the Monsters, which kind of makes sense, but not really, because the basic plot is it involves two kids, once again, getting kidnapped by aliens, but being taken to a different planet, and the different planet being mostly deserted, except for a giant lizard with a knife on his head called Guiron. Now, that name doesn't make any much a lot of sense because Gamera has to go to a different planet. So they're not really attacking anything. They're going to a different planet. If anything, it's kind of Retreat of the Monsters from that perspective, if you think about it. Let's break down Guiron here. You've seen this one before, yeah?
I think I have. It's the Bowie knife monster.
Yes, it is. That right there kind of sums up the reason that I would recommend Gamera vs. Guiron. Because the Bowie knife monster, very unique idea. I think that's one of my favorite kaiju designs, like ever. Even in comparison to some of the Godzilla stuff out there. It's such a cool concept. Hey, lizard with a knife on its head. Oh, I thought you were about to say something. You're taking a yawn. Gotcha. Ooh, goodness.
Boy, I'm reading the plot summary, and they get kidnapped. Those boys get kidnapped to a planet that orbits the sun directly opposite of the Earth. There are cannibals.
Yes.
That they're going to eat the boys, they eat their brains to absorb all their knowledge of Earth.
They're going to. They don't get
to. Guiron gets stuck in a wall and then throws shurikens. He has actual shurikens, like ninjas throwing stars that just kind of come out of nowhere.
They're actually built into his head, and he uses his psychic ability to throw them at Gamera.
Wow.
Yeah.
You can't make this stuff up. This is prime 60s stuff.
Oh, definitely. It's certainly steering even further into schlock than the other ones were. And
the substance runs deep.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, it's proven no further than by Gamera grabbing hold of a monkey bar and swinging around like an acrobat before flying back towards Guiron. That part in particular lives rent-free in my mind for my entire life because like every good cheesy moment in the old Godzilla movies, do you know what the best quality is? It goes on for way too long to the point where it just gets burned into your mind that you're like, oh, okay, this is happening now. They never just randomly throw it in there because this is a giant monster. The gravity of it is so difficult to just cut away from. You have to drag it out really long. And on the one hand, it goes on for too long. On the other hand, I wouldn't have it any other way. So there. Gamera versus Guiron, everybody. I think now is a good time to mention that this was the movie that, specifically that part, that got Mystery Science Theater 3000 into watching the Gamera movies, I believe. This was like in their early days of the show. And because of that, it exposed a lot of people to Gamera as a series. It may not exist in its current form today, and it may not be remembered as well if Mystery Science Theater 3000 didn't make their episode on it. So they deserve a shout out because of that. I greatly appreciate them watching Gamera versus Guiron. I haven't seen the episode, but we salute you, Mystery Science Theater 3000. Thank you for your contributions to the kaiju community. Anyways, we've dragged this on long enough for this most recent break. We're going to take another music break, and when we come back, we'll continue with the Gamera movies, because we need to play legal. Anyways, we'll be back soon. 88.1 The Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Weekends. My name is Nathan.
And my name is Noah.
And we are back to talking about the Gamera series, which we've been just kind of talking about here and there. We've kind of been chipping our way through the Showa series because it's essentially the first era of Gamera movies, the first 8, kind of back in the Showa era of the Godzilla films, which is kind of the counterpart to Gamera in a way. Or more specifically, Gamera is the counterpart to Godzilla, being a giant flying turtle and everything like that. All that fun stuff. So, with all that being said, let's jump into the next movie where we left off with Gamera vs. Jiger from 1970, available to watch on Amazon Prime with a subscription and Tubi with ads. This one, when it came out, was called Gamera vs. Monster X, which I feel like is an interesting name considering the fact that Ghidorah was originally called Monster X it was Astro Monster. Monster X was Ghidorah in Godzilla Final Wars. Everything I just said sounded so incredibly nerdy to anybody who's not even remotely familiar with kaiju or giant monster movies. And I do not apologize for how much of a nerd I sound like talking about all of these movies. I'm a hardcore nerd for kaiju movies, okay? I can't help it. It's my childhood. I was born this way. Anyways, so basic plot of Gamera vs. Jiger. There is a giant statue that is found. And that giant statue summons a tiny little, not really tiny, but a quadrupedal creature known as Jiger. It's an ancient guardian from ancient land times, that thing. And it can shoot little needles out of its face, and for some reason people think it's threatening and terrifying, and I don't get it. For some reason, this one is often called like a good one in the Showa series. I personally don't understand that. But that's just me. That's my own opinion. And I will say, it's been a while since I've watched this movie. I have seen it at least once. Have you seen this, Noah?
I can't say that I recall it. It looks very interesting, but again, I have a feeling I know how it goes at the same time. So,
I mean, let me blow your mind then.
Yeah, go for it.
Let's talk about one thing it can do. So it can shoot little needles out of its Jiger can shoot out little needles, and it goes into Gamera's hands and his feet, which makes it impossible for him to get into his shell form, which is very interesting. He's basically on his back for half the movie, not being able to get back into it. That little statue that I mentioned, the little pole thing that they find, when they pick it up with a helicopter and fly through the air with it, it emanates a whistling noise that Jiger can hear that they use to lure it around. And at some point, Jiger implants a offspring in Gamera, so the two main children character of the movie must get into a submersible thing and go inside of Gamera through his mouth. And it basically turns into an episode of Magic School Bus, but in 1970s in Japan with a low budget.
Huh.
Doesn't that just blow your mind?
It's like that game Operation, but this time it's save Gamera from the parasitic monster.
Yeah. Gesundheit. Gesundheit.
There we go.
There we go.
All right.
Yeah, when you say Operation, you mean like the
board game.
Yeah, the board game. Yeah.
The guy with the big red nose.
Yeah, except in this case, it's Gamera's open mouth, and he makes his little noise, and when the red dot beeps, it's an orange fireball. Now I kind of want that. They should make an Operation version with Gamera. They could have the ninja stars from Guiron in there, because those get stuck in his hand as well. Now I desperately want an Operation game based off of Guiron. And if anybody ever says that What to Watch Weekends doesn't have original content, that's something for you right there. I have unironically said I'd like a board game based off of Gamera that's Operation. Cool. Well, that's a new one. I don't know why I went off on that tangent, but I did.
Hey, it works.
It works. Anyways, so this one is interesting because I've rewatched some of these or seen them once more recently. We essentially watched the first Gamera movies as like a family a while back, and then I got back into it watching, the reboots, but then like the last two in the original series. It was a whole thing. I only saw Gamera vs. Jagger once on that first view through with the family. So I can't really attest to whether or not it's really a step up in quality. I just remember it being weird and surreal going inside of Gamera's body. And that's really all I remember from it. And I remember the whistling pole thing being really stupid to me, but at the same time, it was certainly creative. So it had that going for it at the very least.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's move on to the next one, that being Gamera vs. Zigra from 1971, available to watch on Amazon with a Prime subscription and Tubi with ads. This one was also known as nothing. It wasn't released to TV in the United States, so there's that. This one is about these aliens called the Zigrans who show up and kidnap some kids, and they have a shark monster named Zigra.
Why are all these aliens kidnapping kids? Like, what do they work for?
Themselves, because they're aliens. But I mean, yeah, that's a good question. It just kind of seems convenient that every year it's like, oh, there are aliens that are showing up to kidnap kids, and here's Gamera. And it's always just like, I mean, okay, when I put it that way, I don't think they automatically kidnap the kids. They just so happen to do it pretty frequently. But at the same time, it's like, after the third one in a row doing that, you get kind of tired of it happening,
Like put a twist on it. Put like some guy who walks up to the, hello, Zigrans, do you know who I am? I'm Chris Hansen with NBC's To Catch a Predator.
No. Oh, no. Goodness. Good.
And they run off back to their home planet.
Goodness gracious.
Gamera doesn't have to do a thing. One man and a camera crew saves the world from alien invasions.
To be fair, it was 1971. I don't think Chris Hansen was doing his thing back then.
Was he even alive?
Let's not figure that out. This is Gamera. We're not talking about Chris Hansen, my dude. Let's bring it back to the giant flying turtle and the shark monster in this movie. Because this movie is boring. So very boring. It's like, okay, how do I explain this? Despite being a turtle, you'd be surprised when I tell you that, if I'm being honest, Gamera doesn't really live in the ocean all that much. He kind of just flies around. In comparison to Godzilla, who usually makes his way out of the ocean, comparatively, Gamera's not much of an ocean dweller. Yeah. So with it being a shark monster, it doesn't feel all that thematically connected. I'll give you a better example. You've got the crab, Ibira, that Godzilla fights. That's like a sea creature.
The horror of the deep.
The horror of the deep, right. So it makes sense to fight Godzilla, right? Because he always comes out of the ocean. Gamera doesn't really. So it's a weird comparison, I'd say. And with all that being said, it's not like the fight scenes are all that interesting to watch anyways, because it's underwater. It's like an underwater level in a video game, quite honestly, baked into a cheesy, schlocky 70s movie that, once again, reuses stock footage from the other movies, which is really fun, and they also have annoying kids. Let me tell you, the kids get progressively younger in each movie, to the point where I think the ones in this movie are like the age of like 5 and 4. very young, very annoying. They just kind of squeal, and it's like, that's fun. And keep in mind, because it's Japanese to an extent, they always say Gamera's name like 40 different times in these movies, and it just gets worse with each one. And hearing a 5-year-old scream, Gamera, it really doesn't ever get too grating on the nerves. Yes, it does. It immediately grates on the nerves. I'm now just having this weird memory moment where I'm remembering just how painful it was to listen to these kids screech Gamera's name in Gamera versus Zigra, and it's frustrating me right now. So we're going to move on. Do you have anything else to add to this? No.
Well, this was the last Gamera movie for a while, wasn't it? Because
yes.
Company Daiei went bankrupt, didn't they?
Yes, this is something I wanted to mention. Apparently, I didn't do my research quite as good on Wednesday because I said that they apparently went bankrupt after their last movie in 1980, when in reality they went bankrupt in 1971 around the time of Gamera versus Zigra. And it's interesting because I can't really understand what happened that led them to make this movie. And I wish they hadn't made this movie. The last one we're going to talk about from the original run of Gamera. There are still some more Gamera things we're going to talk about, but the last original run Gamera movie is Gamera Super Monster.
Is that a Star Destroyer?
We'll get to that. This is Gamera Super Monster from 1980, which is available to watch on Amazon and Tubi. Amazon with Prime subscription and Tubi free with ads. This was also known as, when it was broadcast in America, as my least favorite movie ever. Personally, for Nathan Rupp exclusively. I'm joking, that wasn't the title they gave it. I wish they had, because it would be so very accurate. So, Noah, let me tell you what the plot of Gamera Super Monster is. Gamera, okay, is on Earth.
The friend of the children.
Yes, and aliens are outside of Earth, and they take control of a bunch of monsters on Earth. And so Gamera must go and fight the monsters. Now, here's where the problem comes in. The aliens are controlling monsters that were in all of the other movies. So we've got Barugon, Gyaos. We've got, what was the third one?
Virus?
Virus. We've got Guiron. We've got Jiger. And we've got Zigra. They're controlling all of those monsters. And you know what that means? Instead of filming original scenes of Gamera fighting these monsters, they reuse the footage from all of the fight scenes from all the other movies. The last 6. And then string it together with the laziest, worst written plot I've ever seen about this child who meets these 3 superhero women who live on... Space women, whatever. They're wearing capes. They could be from Earth or from space. I don't care. They're superheroes. Who cares? I don't, because they meet each other and the women take the kid along as they go and watch Gamera fight them. They barely do anything and they get killed off at some point, and then, no, not really, they get brought back. Let me tell you what my favorite part of Gamera Super Monster is, Noah, right here and now. My favorite part of this movie is when Gamera decides to sacrifice himself to save the Earth. And if you care about spoilers, why? So this is a spoiler, just to warn you. Gamera flies into space, and he just directly impacts with the Star Destroyer being piloted by the aliens in this movie. It blows up, and Gamera dies. And here's one thing I need to make very clear. I've talked with somebody quite recently about this. It is not specifically a Star Destroyer from Star Wars, because, quite honestly, the Star Destroyers were brought up in The Empire Strikes Back more predominantly. So, to give it some defense, I believe, looking it up, that Gamera Super Monster was released in all of, let's say, Gamera Super Monster was released in March of 1980. The Empire Strikes Back was released in May of 1980. I believe that is correct. Let me look it up really quickly.
Let's see. It was released March 20th, 1980.
Mm-hmm.
The Empire Strikes.
I've already got that one pulled up. It's May 6th, 1980. Mm-hmm. So just by a couple months. So on the one hand, Gamera Super Monster wasn't ripping off Empire Strikes Back directly.
It was ripping off A New Hope because Star Destroyer is featured in the first minute of that movie.
Yes. So that defense doesn't really mean anything.
Nope.
It still definitely looks a lot like
They ripped off Star Wars.
They still did.
They ripped off Star
It's a Star
Wars.
Destroyer, and he flies into.
Crazy.
He just flies into it and dies. That's how it ends.
Look at this. This is a Star Destroyer with wings.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's just it just is. I've seen this movie.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Let me tell you something that so keep in mind that him flying into it and dying is the only original Gamera content filmed for the movie. The rest of it is with that kid and these three girls who just run around doing whatever they want. Every other fight scene is taken from the other movies. Now, again, given the allowance, it was 1980. It was 9 years after the last movie. But it's still like, on the one hand, being a fan, I know I'm at a disadvantage because I've seen the other movies before. But on the other hand, would people really care if that's what's going on? Because it's like, if nobody had ever seen it before, if people were watching Gamera for the first time and hadn't seen any of the other movies, would this still satiate them? No. Because the plot is just that bad in between that they'd get bored and stop watching. You know?
Wow.
That's my opinion, mostly. But I feel confident in saying that it would be annoying to watch it for any amount of time, that they wouldn't even get to all of the original and unique fights about it. I could see one person out there on the globe possibly having that experience. I can't see a lot of other people having that. And because of that, I feel confident in saying that Gamera Super Monster is probably one of the most boring, most uninteresting, most uninspired, most painful movie watching experiences I've ever had. It's a new level of awful for even the worst of the Gamera movies up to this point. It is a new level of awful for even the worst of Godzilla.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, Gamera Super Monster is legitimately my textbook definition of a 0 out of 10 movie. Full stop. I speak unironically and from the heart. Listen to me here, my listeners. This is a 0 out of 10. Very few movies have ever reached that low of a degree for me. I've seen The Room like twice, and that one does not deserve a 0 out of 10 because of how bad it is, because it's enjoyable. This one was probably the most boring and painful thing I've ever seen, and because of that, I feel so strongly towards giving it a 0, because a bad movie that you can laugh at is infinitely better than a awful movie that bores you to the level of physical pain.
Oh.
You know what I mean?
Because, like, you know, you watch All Monsters Attack.
Right.
You know, that's the one where they're like, Godzilla says I have to learn to fight my own battles now. But it's so silly. It's like the son of Godzilla is getting bullied by a red-headed gremlin.
Yeah, like that one, like, with no context, that doesn't make any sense. But look up, like, Destroy All Monsters for those of you at home, if you're able to. Like, recommend looking that up. It looks silly and stupid and crazy. And even then, isn't that like your favorite one out of the Godzilla series?
I'll just say, Destroy All Monsters? Actually, I feel like Gamera Super Monster is trying to riff off of Destroy All Monsters, the Godzilla movie. Well, I mean, in the sense of it's bringing all the monsters from the past movies back together, and they're just whooping it out with the alien mind control, and there's the subplot about the aliens, mind control.
So that's a good point to bring up. That's actually All Monsters Attack, not Destroy All Monsters. Destroy All Monsters is the one about the kid who dreams of going to Monster Island.
No, Destroy All Monsters. I got it right there. Destroy All Monsters is the one where Godzilla and his son and Gorosaurus and Rodan and Anguirus and Ghidorah.
So you're not mentioning the one with the gremlin. No. That's All Monsters Attack.
Yeah, All Monsters Attack.
Okay. Yeah, I misheard you. I'm growing dumb.
No, they
continue with your point.
They have almost the same title.
Yes.
But
that's why I got confused.
It feels like it has the concept of Destroy All Monsters in like, we're bringing everybody back and it's going to be the smackdown of the century. But then it's the All Monsters Attack of... What? But at least All Monsters Attack is funny because it's about a kid and the son of Godzilla running around from a red-headed gremlin that shoots little electricity bubbles.
Yeah, and even then they used original footage. Of this little red-headed goblin. In Gamera Super Monster, once again, recycled footage from all the other movies with no connection. Again, dumb idea to have it be all inside of a kid's dream about dreaming to go to the island and talking with Godzilla's son. At least that, in concept, is connected somewhat. Because now it makes sense, sort of, not really, but whatever. It makes more sense than what they did for Gamera Super Monster, for sure. Again, 0 out of 10. I say that so confidently. 0 out of 10. I couldn't. It hurt so much.
That's actual doo-doo fart. That looks nasty.
You heard it here first, folks. Doo-doo fart, Gamera Super Monster. With all that being said, I think we've spent plenty of time on these movies. On the original run of Gamera movies, that we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we will jump into some of the revivals. So stick around. 88 won the Burg, your movie central. Welcome back to What to Watch Weekends. My name is Nathan.
My name is Noah.
And we are back to talking about the Gamera series. Now, before we get into our last little chunk of reviews here, I want to mention that because of the way just timing has worked out, we are unfortunately unable to really squeeze in talking about the reboot trilogy of the Gamera series, but that's completely fine. You want to know why? Because I already talked about them on What to Watch Wednesdays. I usually use the movies that I talked about on What to Watch Wednesdays as the starting point and sort of the fallback to kind of relate to stuff. But with it being a bigger series like Gamera, it's completely fine that we don't go back and talk about the original three. You know, even with Star Wars, I talked about the original trilogy, and that was a total of 9 movies. With this one, it's a total of about 12.
Yes.
So there's going to be some kind of need to cut back just a little bit. With all that being said, let us jump into one that we've both seen, that being Gamera the Brave from 2006, available on Tubi and Amazon. Tubi with ads, Amazon included with a subscription. Basic plot summary of Gamera the Brave is that a young boy finds an egg that hatches into a tiny little turtle that turns out to be a new incarnation of Gamera. Toto?
Yeah.
All right. Does it?
His name is Toto.
Right. Yeah.
He calls him Toto, but he's a Gamera.
Toto. I get the feeling we're not in Japan anymore. So I think I should also mention that Gamera does fight a monster in this movie, and it's named Zetus, and it looks like a dinosaur. Such a creative, interesting character choice. I'll be honest. When I first watched this movie, I think it looked a lot more, I suppose, menacing than it probably does. Now it just looks like a raptor to me. Like a giant raptor with some of the feathers shaved off.
It's like the Dilophosaurus from Jurassic Park, but if he was Godzilla-sized, and I don't remember what he does. Is he spit fire or something?
Nah, he just roars. That's what I remember him doing.
Let's see.
I think he just like walks around and eats people, and that's about it.
Yeah, he doesn't really.
Doesn't have any powers.
Yeah.
Just kind of exists.
He's just a big guy. But I think the beginning of the movie is so interesting. Do you remember it?
I was looking into it earlier, and I watched it a little bit. Essentially what happens is that it's a full-grown Gamera who sacrifices himself while fighting a bunch of Gyaos. But is that what happens?
Yeah. So, little boy is evacuating his home. It's in 1973. And a boy is evacuating his home because the Gyaos swarm is come to attack his town, his city. And then Gamera appears and, he's unable to exterminate all the Gyaos. So he sacrifices himself in a self-destructibility. And then it flashes forward to the rest of the movie, and now he's the father of the main kid.
Right. Which, I mean, what part of that is super interesting to you?
Well, I think it's interesting because if there's something that you want to bring up, I don't know how much you wanted to, but I remember when this first came out, there was a little short film that somebody had put out on YouTube that was it was like Gamera reimagined, in the same kind of darker, more gritty style of Godzilla 2014.
Right.
And it follows that same thing of a boy's escaping his city being destroyed by the Gyaos, and Gamera comes to defend them.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting to notice the similarities between that. But also, I wish that Gamera little short film was an actual Gamera movie. That would have been awesome.
Yes, it would have. And I want to mention that. Let me look here. I do have it in my notes. That's from 2015. Gamera the Brave is from 2006. So very clearly, it took its inspiration from Gamera the Brave with that opening scene, most likely.
Oh, yeah.
So that's a good point to bring up. I suppose I noticed it more when reading into it earlier today, but I am glad that you brought it up because it just goes to show, like, I suppose tropes and doing the same thing but better isn't exactly a bad thing when it comes to giant monster movies because the fans are kind of starved these days, except for the Godzilla series. When it comes to Gamera, I would rather that they remake the original in a short film format. Not the original. If they remake the most recent one and it's just like the first scene in like the style of the Godzilla movie, I'd prefer that over nothing at all.
Yeah.
So I'll give it that much at the very least. But yeah, I think that is a very interesting point to bring up. I think it is certainly something to talk about, considering the fact that for the rest of the movie, it's really a boy and his dog story and doesn't ever really evolve beyond that. It just involves Gamera growing bigger. It's basically, imagine Clifford the Big Red Dog, but it's a turtle.
And there's an evil dinosaur trying to kill him.
Yeah, but it's still just the boy and his dog type of story, he sends the pet away because the father doesn't want it. Oh, they reconnect. Oh, the dad comes back around to liking the pet, and then it turns big and grows its bottom teeth and then fights off the dinosaur. Standard stuff. I think the point I really wanted to get across with Gamera the Brave is that it's inoffensive. It's fine. It's nothing more than fine. And I think it's definitely a step down in comparison to the Heisei trilogy, which I talked about on Wednesday, that being Gamera Guardian of the Universe, Gamera 2 Attack of Legion, Gamera 3 Revenge of Iris. Like, all of those had higher production values, and I feel like we're trying something out of the norm versus what Gamera had already been and doing a better job at it than what Gamera the Brave does. Because Gamera the Brave does pretty well with staying within the confines of what Gamera already was, which is for children. Gamera the Brave is objectively for children in the fact that it's a boy and his dog story, and they've cutesified Gamera a little bit. Now he's got a fun little nickname, Toto, and he looks all babyish and is not very developed, and it's meant to be more visually appealing to the kids. I think it does a good job with that, but at the same time, I kind of preferred the edgier version of Gamera from the High Side movies, and I think that the younger version just doesn't do it for me on a lot of levels, but I understand why they did it. I think they should have... it just kind of annoys me that there was such a pushback after Revenge of Iris to continue with Gamera being an edgier character. They're like, no, he needs to be the savior of the children. On the one hand, I feel that way. On the other hand, with all the comparisons to Godzilla, I think it is a good time to bring it up that, honestly, if they had gone with Gamera being an edgy villain, it certainly would have leaned more towards Godzilla at some points, more often than not. And I think that's one distinguishing factor of Gamera, that he's always been a friend to the kids in a way in the movies. He's always been that persona of, I'm going to be a giant monster, but I'll still save kids from being attacked. He's got that weird gimmick to him versus Godzilla. Godzilla never does that.
Godzilla doesn't care.
Doesn't care. Gamera at least cares. And on the one hand, I'm kind of annoyed that that's the thing. But on the other hand, what am I supposed to do about that? Like, what are you supposed to do about that? It's just a weird question to ask. You know, it's a kind of psychological exercise. Because on the one hand, it kind of separates Gamera from being that knockoff of Godzilla. And you can tell people with confidence, no, he's got this and this going for him. He's not just a ripoff of Godzilla. But on the other hand, I like the High Side trilogy so much for what they accomplished not being that I can't in good conscience say that I feel I really know confidently which one I feel more strongly towards. Keep it so that it's not a ripoff of Godzilla, or keep it so that it's partially Godzilla, but doing Godzilla a lot better. Especially in the case of the High Side trilogy. He was doing better than most of what Godzilla was doing around that time.
Yeah.
So... that's my whole philosophical thing about it. You know, I feel like I've gotten off track a little bit, but I don't know if I guess I want to ask, are you following me even remotely here?
No, I think so. I think it's about because, well, Gamera came around when Godzilla was already a thing. He was pretty well established at that point, even so early on in his history as a creature. And... you know, Gamera has always kind of followed in Godzilla's footsteps.
Yeah.
In the sense of, he starts off, very serious movie. Then it gets goofier and sillier and kind of like, la-di-da-di-da. And then eventually it cuts. And then a few years later, they bring it back. And it is serious. It's much darker. It's much more... high stakes, and even if there are aliens and weird things showing up, it's much more grounded in reality in the sense, you know.
Sure.
And then, funny enough, both of them end up with the main character dying.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny? Because doesn't the end of, what's the third Gamera
versus Iris, or Revenge of Iris.
Yeah, Revenge of Iris. Doesn't he die?
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't?
No, he doesn't. But it is...
I thought he did.
I mean, if you view it as like a continuation, I mean, this isn't how it happened in canon. But again, I sound like such a nerd saying that. But if you view the end of Revenge of Iris, where Gamera is like going to face down a bunch of Gyaos, and then the beginning of Gamera the Brave is him fighting a bunch of Gyaos before self-destructing, then technically speaking, kind of.
Yeah. I feel like, in a way, it's very similar in the sense of like the self-sacrifice kind of stuff.
Right.
You know, Godzilla overheats to destroy Destroyer.
Right.
And whatnot. And then it cuts again. And I feel like that's where the two have really diverged.
Yeah.
Because Godzilla had a bit of an identity crisis. You know, you had like GMK, and you had Godzilla 2000, you had Godzilla 1998, you
Right.
had Final Wars and whatnot, and it was kind of really fishing around for what it wanted to be. But eventually, the franchise found its footing, both with the MonsterVerse and with Shin Godzilla, in kind of bringing it back to, you know, one has the avenue of the more, maybe a little bit more silly, but still including some allegorical elements to it.
Yeah.
And new allegories. And the other one really focuses on the serious and more grounded reality of it.
Yeah.
And I feel like Gamera versus Godzilla hasn't had that moment yet.
Yeah. What happened with Gamera is after Gamera the Brave, it took them 17 years to make another concrete Gamera thing.
And that was the television show on Netflix.
Yes. Which
I think it was on Netflix.
Oh, yes. We're
Yeah.
gonna get into that like right now. Because that's a really good point. It did take them a while to get into it. And that resulted in there being 17 years after Gamera the Brave before they got into Gamera Rebirth from 2023, available to watch on Netflix right now, which is about Gamera fighting all of his old monsters. And it's animated in this weird 3D anime style.
Oh no, they did the Planet of the Monsters thing.
Yeah, kind of.
Oh, ew.
I'll say this. I'll put it to you this way.
Mm-hmm.
Despite the quality levels, despite the story being kind of middle of the road, the fight scenes are cool in my opinion. I like the way they've redesigned most of the monsters. Guiron looks so cool.
Oh,
Virus
they
looks
look
great.
awesome.
They look great. I'm so annoyed they didn't bring back Barugon because the rainbow shooting lizard is so fun.
Oh.
But
Is the only one they didn't bring back?
what? It's basically the only one from the Showa series they didn't bring back. It was stupid.
Let's see,
But
Paragon.
listen, here's an important point.
Oh.
Here's a very important point in regards to Gamera Rebirth. Despite the quality of it, despite the plot not being all that great, I will say I connected with the kid characters decently enough. I was entertained. And keep in mind, this is an anime series on Netflix that is Gamera. Saying that out loud is crazy to me. And it still blows my mind that Netflix had the gall to release a Gamera series. Again, they may not have been like super involved in it, but the fact alone that they released it onto their platform says to me either they've understood now that they can actually exploit the fans of this very old franchise, or they see the potential avenue of possibly getting more eyes on Gamera. Again, this is 2023, 2 years ago, but that's reason enough to the point where I feel like something like this could really signal to studios like Netflix, hey, guys, Gamera deserves to come back. People want him back, and we can make money doing that. And that's why I feel confident in saying, in my opinion, I would recommend Gamera Rebirth to anybody who's a fan of giant monster stuff, especially a fan of Gamera, because the way you get big corporations to spend their money and try to exploit you by giving you a bunch of movies about your thing is by watching the things they make. What we've been seeing recently with Disney is we've seen people try to convince Disney not to make their live action remakes. You got to realize the reason they're doing that is because they've got a lot of money in it. So how about we use that to our advantage and show them, hey guys, if we give you money to show us Gamera, will you show us more Gamera? And the response will most likely be, yes, we will show you more Gamera because we are making a lot of money on it. Give us more money and you will get more Gamera. And it's like, on the one hand, scummy, on the and it's giving corporates more money. On the other hand, Gamera was dormant for 17 years. Pretty much. Sure, he had that short film in 2015, but he was pretty much dormant.
Yeah.
And it took so long to get anything. I consider it a miracle that anything to begin with happened. And I think him being in the MonsterVerse would be cool, but I just want anything at all. If this doesn't sell you, I don't know what will. To anybody who isn't a massive giant monster movie fan, there is a possibility, however slim, that using a way of signaling to Netflix, hey, we want more Gamera, could result in a Gamera movie that involves Yamazaki in some way. If you don't know who that is, Yamazaki, I believe his name is Takahashi Yamazaki. Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Takahashi Yamazaki, the guy who was the director of Godzilla -1, might get involved in Gamera. Not saying he will, not guaranteeing any of it. Takashi Yamazaki. I'm so sorry. Takashi Yamazaki is his name. And he directed Godzilla -1, arguably one of the best Godzilla movies in years. If we could get him involved in Gamera, that would be peak cinema. It would blow my mind. It would blow everybody's mind. It'd be insane to watch this decades-old monster who's been around only about 10 years less than Godzilla coming back on the big screen in such a massive and impactful way.
That'd be pretty cool.
I'd want to see it. Would you like to see it, Noah?
I mean, I think, honestly, it's about time that Gamera kind of reared his head again, because 17 years of being dormant, I don't think Godzilla has ever had that kind of dormancy. No. They did have that between Final Wars and Godzilla 2014, but that was 10 years.
Yeah.
This is almost 20 of no Gamera. And to be honest, I feel like he could really be adapted to the modern age in a way that balances the friend of the children. I was reading a few of the reviews of Gamera Rebirth, and some people say that it is a great balance between the friend of the children and Gamera's a good guy, but also in the same turn of events, showing off the more gritty and kind of violent aspect of the Heisei trilogy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can attest that it definitely captures some of that pretty well. I hate to cut this off because we could go on for the next 3 hours talking about Gamera, because as you can tell, we both really like this series. But that is unfortunately all the time we have for tonight here on What to Watch Weekends. Oh dear. Thank you for being on as a guest tonight, Noah.
Of course.
I will, for those of you listening in, thank you for tuning in. I will be back next Wednesday for an episode of What to Watch Wednesdays from 8 to 9 p.m. here on 881 The Burg. I'll be back next Saturday for another episode of What to Watch Weekends from 8 to 10 p.m. If you're interested in following along with each show, please follow along at What to Watch Wednesdays, all one word, no caps, no spaces, on Instagram and YouTube. And again, I'll be back next Wednesday telling you all what to watch. Good night, everybody.
Bye.